Mike Gorenstein. We're going to do this every quarter. We have for the past, I don't know, year, which is fun. We get to connect you, hear about your quarterly updates that you're providing to the markets, to your investors, to everybody, and to us. Welcome. Can you hear
Sorry,
me?
I think it skipped. So I heard the get to talk about quarterly, and then you froze.
Okay. Well, I just was welcoming you, so welcome.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, appreciate it. Thanks for having
That's
me.
all I didn't really say anything. Believe me, I didn't really say anything. You released your quarterly results this week. One thing that stuck to me, and we'll talk about specifically to Cronos and earnings and all that, but what is going on in Israel? Because we talk about, in theory, a lot of times sort of international markets. You are certainly entrenched in what's happening in Israel. You export from Canada there. That has some Israeli companies seemingly upset with you and other Canadian companies, I would imagine. There was a bunch referenced in your report. Give us an update about that and maybe sort of zoom out and what is happening with the sort of export market into Israel.
Sure. One thing that's actually interesting is that we are one of the largest Israeli companies. So we've got a license there in 2017. We have a greenhouse there, manufacturing, salespeople, marketing. So kind of
The full business.
the full business. So it's like it's funny. We're both a Israeli company and a Canadian company, and yeah. Essentially, this has come up again. So it was it last year or 2 years ago. Went through this whole process where dumping is kind of what the allegation is. And look, I think where this stems from, just big picture, is there's been price compression in Israel. Not every company is surviving, and some of the companies are saying we think this is because of Canada. I think that if you look across the U.S. states and Canada and even now like Germany and really any market, what you find is it's pretty hard for 100 companies to all thrive in a market, and patients would prefer not paying as much, so they're gonna take product that's less. So it's not like one reason, but so the allegations is dumping is essentially it's an anti-dumping case, but dumping is essentially if one a country or business in a country have too much product, so they just discount it and sell it for really cheap at a loss in another market, and that would be dumping. In this case, like they're saying that we're selling it in Israel for like all of Canada, selling it in Israel cheaper than they're selling it in Canada, doing it like a lot, and it's just not really the case. So I think that's sort of what, like last time it's different data, but it's now for the new renewed year is being looked at. And I think that if you're in the cannabis industry, you kind of know like that's not the case. This isn't, if it was, we wouldn't build out a team of 80 people, invest like 100 million shekels and expand capacity to dump. That wouldn't, that would be a strange way of doing it.
Right. Right. So there are very straightforward ways to do it, and that is not it.
Yeah, no, it's a real business for us. I think the tough thing is you also have like patients, like on the line, right? So if you were to put tariffs on, something gets more expensive, disrupt people's care. There's a lot of things. There's just a tough. But look, I think that like the data is the data. I think it's something we're confident in. We've been through it already. We'll go through it again. We'll comply. We'll answer every question. And but I think ultimately, like we think it just doesn't have merit. I mean, it's pretty. Like I think like intuitively, if you're in the industry, you kind of know like it's not the case that it's Israel is a dumping ground. That wouldn't make sense.
No. Talk a little about outside of Canada, outside of Israel. Talk about the international markets, because that saw a big increase on your books as well. Give a little bit sort of a footprint update on that too, because it's nice to talk to a company that is actually an international company doing business internationally. We are so focused all the time, many times, on sort of what's happening market by market in the US, which is important, but also on the grand scheme of things can be very small. But talk about sort of the international market outside of, well, where you operate in Canada and Israel. Talk about the rest of it.
Yeah, no, I think things are going well in Germany. I think, look, and there's probably like a little bit of a tale of like two, like, what we're facing versus others. I think for us, we've always been focused on winning the market we're in, move to another one. And I think you've seen a lot of companies that maybe weren't doing so well because it got so competitive in markets like Canada or Israel, or Australia. And then they moved to Germany and they were enjoying this windfall, and now more competition's come. From our perspective, it's not as competitive as some of the other markets, but we had the same competitor set, maybe even smaller. but now everyone is sort of internationally moving and focusing on Germany and UK. But there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of opportunity, and it's we don't have boots on the ground. We work with distributors, but ultimately, like this goes back to like the core and like the we had this sort of a crazy unique strategy. Everyone's like, oh, you do it very differently, and the strategy is just make good products and people will want them. So like it's a really basic answer, and they're like, oh, what are you doing different? It's like I would just.
It seems that's almost like the type of Ted Lasso thing you'd post above the door. Make good products and people will want them, and people touch it out the way out the door every time they leave. But it seems so dead simple that it's so simple it works.
Well, look, it's not easy to do, right? It takes
Right,
it
right.
takes a
I
long
mean,
time. You have
simple
to like.
strategy, hard to execute.
And look, they were at the beginning. Like if you remember, if you go back to what people used to like think about us or say about us, we were like, oh, you guys are like a science project or like R&D or just like spending money on research, and you don't have a huge production facility, and you don't have production facilities in 20 countries and licenses and like but if you focus on making good products, focus on how to make them efficiently, eventually, when things are open, that's when it matters. So yeah, I wish I had like a really cool, creative way to describe like what we do there, but that's fundamentally what we're doing is just making good products and selling them, and it's working.
And you're sitting on a lot of cash,
Yeah.
which I don't say those words very often. We're talking to cannabis companies for sure. Talk a little bit about that, and how does that factor into sort of what you do ahead? Is it sort of keeping your powder dry? Is it waiting for amazing opportunities? Is it all of those things? Like, how do you think about that?
I mean, ironically, if you were to like sit in our meetings and like watch the way we operate and sit in other companies' meetings and then ask like blindly what's the balance sheet of each company look like, you would probably think we have the least money. Um, so I try to not let it influence the way we operate. I think that we're still very disciplined, and I think it's look, if we have an opportunity that is accretive, that will make sense, that returns value, obviously we will fund it, we'll do it. But I still scrutinize everything. I mean, if we'll look at like an example is like we like a couple of years ago, I came back as CEO. One of the first things I saw was like, wait, we still have a conference line. We use Teams. Like, what do we have? Like this like paid dial. It's probably like a couple $100, and it's like this is crazy. We need to get rid of this. But like I think that the cash is there for when there's big opportunities and big strategic moves you want to make. It's a nice cushion certainly to have. But ultimately, it doesn't change the way that you operate, the way that you win. And what we've seen is usually the companies with the most cash historically, because you rely on that as a cushion. You think I can buy all these things and these it's going to make move. It doesn't really work. It's focus on operate as though you need to generate the cash, and then you move from there. But it does when I think about the U.S., when I think about like other markets, it helps me when we sit and look at the strategy, be able to say like, we are going to win in edibles, we're going to win in vapes, we're going to win pre-rolls, and be like, well, what are you doing with concentrates? Like, you know what? Like, we will eventually get to concentrates, but if someone else builds an amazing brand, I hope this happens. I hope someone builds an amazing, disruptive, super strong brand in concentrates, and then I can buy that, and I can the rest of my platform, right, becomes more valuable. I can distribute it more places. So it also helps with that. It helps us stay focused on the things that we want to win in, that I think we're going to be really good at. And, we can buy companies in the areas where, we haven't spent focus or we haven't spent time versus trying to do everything. So it's helpful.
You talked about, I want to zoom in onto Canada, which I often like to do because it's where I live. And it's where you guys started. Talk about the brand's positioning in Canada, because I think spinach is number one in vapes and edibles. And has been for some time. But are there other categories that you talked about that you're going to be investing in or looking to acquire in? Like, what are the other sexy categories that you're looking in Canada? Or is it more like if something emerges, we'll be interested in it, but for now we're focused on spinach and these two categories and the others we operate in, trying to get to one and two.
I think pre-rolls is the answer. It's extremely important. And there's different types of pre-rolls, different things that we focus on. Big R&D effort into pre-rolls. I think that, for a while we've talked about it, but we tend to take a long time on innovation. Like I don't think that first mover advantage means what people think it does. I think if you have a better product, cannabis consumers switch so often. They know the product, and I think cannabis consumers talk about and think about and research products more than most other categories. So pre-rolls are not just like, I think originally it was like, oh, if you have flour that's not good, put it in a pre-roll. That's what the category was. But there's so much you can do. Like, our Lord Jones hash fusions are like my favorite product we have. I think it's probably more of a niche product, but there's so much you can do in terms of what type of filter you have, how you process the material, how what part you're using, what you do with infusions, coatings. So I think that's an area, and you're seeing us rise, right now in pre-rolls. So we're going up the rankings, but I think that'd be the big one. Flour. What's interesting is, despite I think we're very good at flour, to me, flour is eventually somewhat commoditized. The more matters about the genetics, obviously how you grow it matters. But I think it just feeds into everything you do, and so I don't look at like what's our market share in flour. I think flour is important for other categories, but from the brand perspective, eventually I do think it's gonna be more about pre rolls. And I look at like tobacco, right? Like pipe tobacco, or like loose tobacco. It's there, but there's like different metrics people look at. And I think craft flower would be different, like in the premium, like, indoor local craft growers, like that's always going to be a thing. But I think being able to be efficient, being able to have good input material for pre-rolls matters. And so I say that being like a leader in flower, like, I think more long-term, what's going to happen.
About the brand as opposed to the product.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that we have genetics. Like, I think about it product by product. Like, we have certain genetics that are like dominant in flour, and it's really important that you want to grow that really well. But I don't think about it as like spinach is a flour brand. It's like we are a product brand, and some of the genetics are the products. But I think that like GMO cookies, if I changed the brand name on it, people would, after like one, sort of sales cycle, try the product and be like, wow, that's a great genetic. They don't care what the brand name is.
Right.
I think there's a trust that's been established with spinach that we're probably putting out good products, but you still have to put out a good product every time. And I think that when you go across borders and think about different like facilities, pre-rolls are going to be easier to keep consistent than flour, because once I have a different facility, a different environment, it can change.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say pre-rolls is probably the most important kind of frontier for us.
And you talked about the different categories of pre-rolls. We just did one of our analytics companies that we work with, Little Alerts, did a project in New Jersey, and the only thing holding its price right now is actually infused pre-rolls over the past sort of 3-4 months, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas that actually holds. I mean, it is both a growing category and holding its price, which is pretty unique in a quasi-mature market.
Well, I think about it as far as also like what can you make consistent, because pre-rolls, and not so much the base pre-rolls, but the infused pre-rolls, right? Like you think about, if you look at like a certificate of analysis and you break down what's in there, right? You have a certain percentage of like fats and waxes, but it's ultimately what's the cannabinoid mix, what are the terpenes you have in there, what's the texture, and it's much easier market to market to adjust the infusions and adjust what that formulation is. And same with vapes and edibles than it is to grow flower the same way halfway across the world.
Yeah.
The genetic is easily 2/3 of what the output is, but that last third, it will change, and it changes, year to year in any, ag environment. So it's also easier to keep it more consistent. But yeah, I think pre-rolls is really important. It's like a big focus of mine, has been for some time. So that's, the recent one was puffers though.
Can I ask you a question? It's obviously related to Cronos, but more about sort of the functioning of a public company, because you've been doing it for a long time. We talked a little about before we pressed play. Talk a bit about the process of putting out quarterly earnings reports. Whereas I think companies new to the public markets, it must be quite a burden and a big shock to the system. But talk about it having been in it for some time. Like, how big of it on a quarterly basis? Like, how much time are you spending on it? The team spending on it? How much of a burden is, especially sort of with a U.S. listing?
Yeah, I mean, so if we were the first to do a U.S. listing for cannabis companies, and at first it was like a crazy thing. There's a few different parts. It also depends how big you are as a company. I believe if you're over 700 million in market cap, you're what's called a WIXI or accelerated filer. You have different standards. If you're smaller, you like the smallest type on NYSE or NASDAQ. I can't remember the exact number, but you have like 5 years before you have to be SOX compliant. But if you have to be SOX compliant, you usually have a 1-year grace period from when you list. You've got a lot you have to do. So it's not just what are your numbers, it's also testing all these different control points. You're audited on your controls. And it's really a year-end thing, but you need to test as you go. Right. Every quarter, you have to have your financials reviewed with your auditor. Depends how many markets you're in, how you're rolling things up. For us, we've been doing it for years, and every year we've gotten more and more efficient, but it's really tough at first. And so it used to be like we were up all night for like a couple weeks trying to like, how do we like tick and tie and make sure everything's done. But as you get in more automated systems, it certainly gets a lot easier. The numbers, naturally pull through. Uh, you have your board pack, so it's not just financials. Also, you have board meetings, you have committee meetings. It's like a overall just a big review of your business. It's not just here's a call saying what we've done. So I think, yeah, it's definitely like a stressful time, and I think we also talked about like it's not as big of a media circus. It's not as big a like there's not as much attention as used to be on the industry. I think when we first listed, there was a month where we traded more than Apple. Like, I think people forget about like those days when like we were,
Yeah.
we used to have like 20, 40 million shares trading a day. So you had, all the big banks covering us. You had a lot of media coverage. And I think now it's more just, okay, here are our numbers. You do, investor calls and you get back to business. But I use it internally also as like a measuring stick. Here's our progress. Where are we for the year? Let's go back, prioritize our different objectives, see what's working, see what's not.
Well, plus you get to talk to us.
Yeah, of course.
I mean,
And
that's clearly the highlight of doing this every quarter is getting to talk to me and sometimes Jeremy as well. But Mike, I appreciate it. I know you have a tight timeline as this all rolls out. We appreciate the time this quarter and next quarter. We appreciate that too, and last quarter, and the quarter before that. Good luck as you flip into the end of summer and beyond. Thanks so much, Mike.
all right, thanks.
You got it.